What's up guys, Bo here again. And in this entry I want to talk to you guys about empathy, right? And empathy from the point of view of, developing perspective, right? In previous entries I've introduced, the idea of broadening your horizons and developing your perspective, right? And from that, basically developing a flexible identity, right? The way that you see things, right? The axis of perception that I introduced, where, you have an additional axis of perception, which is energetic, right? Which is to do with meaning, to do with identity, right? To do with context. Developing your perspective so that you can then see things in a more objective way, right? And today I want to talk to you about empathy, right? And how all of us will at some point find ourselves as either the king or the peasant. Sorry, not peasant, the king or the student. I don't want to use the word peasant, right? The king or the subject, right? Or the teacher or the pupil / student, right? And what do I mean by this? Well, it is like you'll know the significance of what I'm saying here when you get that moment of a role reversal, right? I don't know if you've had those moments where, because they tend to be quite rare, quite few and far between, where suddenly the script is swapped, like the script is flipped on you. So basically, for example, right? You are someone who's very nice. You're someone who is very, very kind of passive and, isn't very assertive. And most of your interactions involve you basically, just kind of catering for the other person, pleasing the other person, that kind of thing. But for some reason there is this friend who appears, or like this person who appears, where you suddenly become the assertive one. Where you suddenly become the person who has to take care of that person, who has to babysit that person. And that's the weirdest feeling ever, right? But it is a crucial feeling for you to kind of understand the significance of this, what I'm about to this thing that I'm explaining, that you are sometimes the king and you're sometimes the subject. You're sometimes the teacher, you're sometimes the student, right? Because basically, when you haven't had that experience of having the script flipped on you, you're so identified with being, a nice person, or an aggressive person, or, whatever it is, like the one side of the coin, right? You're so identified with that when someone comes along who basically changes your role in relation to them, it it's so weird, because you're like I thought I was like the one who was kind of very nice and overly apologetic and overly passive and stuff like that. But now there's this person, they're a wreck, right? I have to take care of them, and I thought I was bad, right? And that's such a strange feeling, but also a very enlightening feeling, right? And the more that this happens to you, the more you will realize that you aren't necessarily a nice person, absolutely. You're not necessarily a overly passive person or an overly aggressive person or whatever. A stupid person, or the person who's highly intelligent, or whatever trait you want to talk about, or scrutinize. You're not necessarily that person all the time, right? Sometimes you will be the opposite, right? And this slowly teaches you that what you've identified with is not necessarily permanent, right? And this basically teaches you to be able to see different sides of an argument, see the differing perspectives that we each hold, right? Because once you've had that experience of being the assertive person when you're normally the passive person and you identify as such, the next time someone comes along, or the next time you have an issue with that, you can then have these two perspectives, like these two identities in your mind, such that you can understand what is happening between you and the other person, right? You understand that actually, well, I don't necessarily have to be completely passive right now. Like, I have the perspective of being someone who's actually assertive, right? So you might be faced with someone who, for example, is more assertive than you normally, where you would normally be very passive towards, but you now have this additional perspective where you can now actually be assertive towards this person who would normally usually kick your ass in terms of making decisions, right? When you see when you see it right for you to do so. Similarly, you can learn to see the perspective. Like, it's so weird because, for example, if you're someone who is passive, right, and you see someone who's more passive than you, and so you have to play the more assertive role, you start to see this person as being, but you start to think I know how he feels, right? Because I was like that. If only he could see what it's like if only he wasn't so deeply identified with being passive, right, then he would see so much more, right? And yeah, so basically this is curious kind of happening that will happen to you many times in your life, that you can then start to develop this this perspective of this empathy, right? Because you experience yourself in many different ways. You disidentify from the kind of the one persona that you've had all your life, and you start to see how you could be someone different. And this is also key to trusting yourself, right? And developing trust, right? By being able to see these multiple different perspectives and identities, you can then more easily visualize yourself as being successful, or whatever you want to visualize, right? So cool. That was my message. My camera is about to die. I've done quite a few entries in this one sitting, so cool. Hope that was helpful. There was probably a lot more that I could have developed into in this entry, but ultimately, just next time that happens to you, just be cognizant of it. Just notice that it's happening, and notice what this implies. Notice what this implies for you in terms of the way that you've been thinking of yourself, the way that you've identified yourself, and realize that it's not as rigid as you thought, right? And then if you keep doing that, then you will be well on your way to developing a more flexible perspective, a more flexible identity, and just a more objective view on the world and yourself and other people. So cool. Hope that entry has been helpful for you, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.